Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Worldhoppers channel. This is a collaborative channel where we get together with a bunch of booktubers, and all of our proceeds from the channel and the merch from the channel go to charity. So today we're going to be talking about science fiction. We often talk a lot about fantasy on this channel, so we wanted to mix it up because we do have a lot of sci-fi lovers in the Worldhoppers group. So today we're going to be giving all kinds of science fiction recommendations. But before we get started, I want to introduce our new face here. That'd be Rachel from the Shades of Orange. My dogs are barking. I apologize. So Rachel, if you want to introduce yourself in your channel, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. As Jade said, I'm Rachel with the Shades of Orange. So on my channel, I'm known for, well, primarily I'm known for reading horror, which is probably my biggest niche. But my other true love is science fiction. So I was really excited to get on here to talk about my sci-fi love. And then I also read thrillers and fantasy, but horror and sci-fi are probably my two favorite genres. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be among the Worldhoppers because I was like the OG subscriber who was watching these videos. I remember in the middle of the night when I was like bottle feeding my son and I needed like hours and hours of YouTube content to keep me awake at night. So this is actually pretty surreal to be on the other side for sure.
Yeah. I get all kinds of recommendations from Rachel's channel. She does a lot of, I mean, like she said, horror and sci-fi, but she reads a lot of things that aren't super popular, which is always nice to see. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with our first discussion point. So we're going to start out by talking about science fiction for beginners. Let me bring over my handy dandy sticky note. So I have a couple that I want to talk about. I actually have three, but I know one of them somebody else is probably going to talk about, so I'm going to skip that one. I think both of the ones I want to recommend are actually YA. I read a mix of YA and adult on my channel. So I've sprinkled in some YA books into my picks. But one that I think is a lot of fun and easy to get into for people who haven't read a lot of sci-fi is the Illuminae Files. It's a trilogy by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. And this one is fun because one, it's like really well known for its like atypical formatting. It isn't written in narrative form. It has like chat logs and things like that to tell a story. The audiobooks are also really great, so I will plug that as well. Yeah, the cover is also beautiful. And it has some really cool formatting stuff. So my favorite way to read the series is to like listen to the audiobook while flipping through the physical copy, because if you only do one or the other, I feel like you miss out on some aspect of it. And these are kind of thrillery too. And so they're really fast paced. They're chunky, but because they're not written in a narrative form, they go by really fast. So I definitely think that is a good place to start for beginners. And then another one of my favorite like subgenres of sci-fi is like dystopian or post-apocalyptic kind of stuff. And one that is a little bit older and that not a lot of people talk about, so I like to plug it whenever I can, is More Than This by Patrick Ness. And this one is it's a YA book. It's about a boy who at the beginning of the book, he dies. That's not a spoiler. But and then he wakes up into a world where he is the only person there. So like you don't know, did he really die? Is he in the afterlife? What is going on? I really enjoyed that book, and it's also a bit like emotional. It's kind of a bit of a like coming of age, coming out story as well. But that one doesn't get enough love, so I wanted to plug that one for beginners too.
That's super exciting that you just said that, because I love Patrick Ness and haven't read this yet, and I hadn't heard anyone talk about it. So now I'm really excited to get to it.
I really enjoyed it. I think that, I know we haven't talked about dark matter yet, but I like often recommend it. I mean, it's not really that similar to dark matter, but like as someone who likes dark matter, I think if you want something that gives you similar vibes, not plot wise, but just feeling wise, I don't know, maybe not, but I like more than this. I was about to say dark matter again. Definitely recommend.
All right. So I had like a few, and I tried to think of it from different angles. So like, are you coming from like a fantasy background? Are you coming from someone who hasn't picked up a book in forever, and so you're just like trying to get into reading? And for that one, I picked The Martian because that's a book that I read in like a day. And so if you're like someone who hasn't read a book in a long time and you want to feel that accomplishment, it's a hysterical, hard sci-fi. Like it doesn't like pull its punches on the science. The main character is hysterical. I feel like I don't have to talk about the plot. It's about a person stranded on Mars and he grows potatoes. There's a movie. What?
Yeah.
Who's the
That
actor
was
in
my
that one?
third take that I was like, somebody else is going to talk about this, so I don't need
Yes.
to.
Yeah. Well, and then I have another one, and this one's really weird, and I know no one's going to mention it because it's really out there. It's more like literary science fiction and that's called Exit West. So this is a book that's like, it's almost contemporary. It's almost present day. And suddenly there are doorways popping up all around the world, and people can go through a doorway and they'll end up in a different country. So you can't have country boundaries anymore. And so you're primarily in the Middle East. You're never given a country. And so it's kind of like there's this whole refugee crisis, and no country can control the influx or efflux of people everywhere. So it does what I love in science fiction, where you get to talk about this issue that we have in a world and take away a portion of it. Like, when we problem solve, we have boundaries, we have borders, we can control them. What if you can no longer control those borders? And it's also this really lovely story of these two people and them traveling around the world together and how their relationship changes. And it's really adult, and it was really touching. So I think that's really good for people who have like a contemporary literary background and they just want to have that little bit of a sci-fi element just thrown into their story. And then my last one is, if you're like a huge series reader of like fantasy, I feel like you can't go wrong picking up the Red Rising series. It's super fast paced, and I think it has so many tropes that you're already used to in fantasy. And I won't talk about it too much because I feel like a lot of people here really like Red Rising, some maybe more than me, but that one was one that I think started my sci-fi journey, where I picked it up because it had like character tropes that I was super used to, and I was just like eating it up. And sometimes I read it and I'm like, they are using weapons that I'm used to in fantasy. This is so cool. And so yeah, those are my like beginner ideas.
Yeah, you have a really good point. I thought about that too, about how it kind of depends on where you're coming from and what your comfort zone is, trying to find something that mixes that with sci-fi. I think that's a really good point.
Okay, so you guys will have to bear with me because these answers are a bit on the fly today. I was going to say Illuminati Files as well, because I think that may have been what like got me into sci-fi to begin with. So it's a really good answer. I guess I'll say The Humans by Matt Haig is a really good sci-fi book for beginners because it doesn't get like too complicated and scientific. It's about this alien that has to come to Earth because humans, I think it's Riemann's hypothesis. It's some mathematical equation that we finally solved, and they don't want us to have that knowledge because that's basically what has set us back compared to every other species in the universe. So this alien comes to Earth and has to disguise himself as a human. And it's very humorous, which I think will work really well for some people who don't want like a really dense, complicated sci-fi, but it has like such important messages, and it's really like what it means to be a human, what it means to love and be alive and find family and friendship and relationships. And it's actually like a super deep book, in my opinion. It was like very touching, and it shocked me because I did not expect to have that emotional impact from that book. And it's pretty short as well. I think it's like, I don't know, maybe less than 300 pages or close to that. So that's a good place to start, I think. And then I guess the other one I'll say, if you're looking, I would think I'm fuzzy on like genre labels within sci-fi. Like
They like overlap a lot. And
I'm really bad at it.
I have so many genre bending ones on my list. Go crazy.
So Old Man's War, I think by John Scalzi could also be a good place to start for beginners, because it might have been one of the earlier adult sci-fi series that I started. And it's about, so there's like this alien race that we need to protect the people of Earth from, but to join the army, I think you either have to be 65 or 75, something like that. They want people with knowledge. And once you sign up for this army, I'm so bad at spoilers. I don't want to say too much, but you can't, your life on Earth is done and you cannot come back to Earth. And there's a lot of really cool, like, technology things that happen with your body and consciousness and stuff like that. So it's a really fun but engaging, kind of more action-packed story, I feel like. So I think that those are really different from one another, but could both be a good place to start.
I like Old Man's War. Oh, sorry. I like Old Man's War as a pick just because, like you said, it has that really cool technology, but it's explained in a really a digestible way for someone who's maybe a little bit intimidated by that. Because I think if I remember, the character who's going through this process of becoming a soldier literally gets a pamphlet at the beginning explaining what is going to happen. And I read it when I was first getting into adult sci-fi, and I found that really helpful when, it's not necessarily a straight up info dump, but it really is like, here are the facts. I'm going to walk you through how this future world works. And I remember finding that really reassuring at the time.
Yeah, me too, because I kind of needed, I don't want to say hand-holding, I don't know if I love that term, but I kind of wanted that in the book to help me get used to it, I guess.
I've been wanting to read that one for so long, and you guys are making me want to go get it, because I've stared at it at the bookstore for so often, and you've talked about the humans for so long. And doesn't he have one that just came out that's not sci-fi that everyone also loves?
It's the Midnight Library. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to read all of those. So I'm going to say for beginners, I recently read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. And this is very much light on the sci-fi elements and is much more, I think, of like an adult contemporary that focuses on themes of like social media and the role it plays in our society, fame, and what that can do to a person, how that can change someone. And what's really cool about this book is it uses this kind of, it's not an alien invasion necessarily. The premise behind it is that we have our main character who is like a college-aged girl, and she's walking home from something late at night in New York City and stumbles upon this humongous statue that just came out of seemingly nowhere. And she calls it Carl. She decides she wants to make a YouTube video, kind of just introducing Carl, just kind of all in fun, and releases this YouTube video introducing this statue to the world. And overnight, that video goes viral because the next morning, when everybody wakes up, they realize these statues are actually seemingly came out of nowhere all across the globe in all of these huge cities. And they're like, what in the world are these statues? We think it might be aliens, and we're not totally sure why they're here, what their purpose is. So that's very much a prominent part of the book. But even more so, it very much examines how this girl who had this overnight viral video sensation deals with this role in society that she is placed into, and how like governments would respond to that sort of situation. And she's kind of this bridge between like the everyday person and now this famous icon. And it's just really, it has a lot of interesting like social commentaries, but it's also just like a fun, witty, like it just has like a sarcastic kind of humor to it. I really enjoyed this. I just had so much fun with it. And I think it's light enough on the sci-fi where if you're totally new to the genre, then you'll enjoy it. And it leaves off on like quite a fun cliffhanger. So I really enjoyed this one. I would recommend this if you have never picked up like anything with sci-fi and you like more of like the adult, like contemporary stories that focus on some of those like social like commentaries. I think it's that one.
I'm so glad you did bring that up because it's so good. Also, it's a great like starter audiobook because the audiobook is almost feels like a podcast and it's addictive. I don't listen to audiobooks that often. And when I read that one, I was like purposely going on longer walks because I loved it so much.
It was so great. Yes.
Yeah, I've been wanting to read that too. I'm a big fan of the Green Brothers online presence. Like I haven't read any of John Green's books or anything, but I definitely have heard good things about this one and I'm super interested in it.
It's a fun one.
Have you read the second one yet?
Yes, I actually just read that one. I like the first one more.
But the second too. The second one's still good. It's just
it's still good.
Is it a duology or is there going to be more?
Yeah, it's just 2 books.
Just 2. It's the Carl's Duology is the technical name, I think.
Yes.
Nice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So am I up?
You are up.
Sounds good. All right. So I was thinking, because we already talked about The Martian, I always have a book that I like to recommend for people who've read this. And often I think like this is often the first like science fiction book, or at least adult science fiction book that people read. And then they're like, okay, now what? And so I'm happy that I read a book that obviously nothing's quite as perfect as the perfection of The Martian, but I do feel like I have a pretty good comp. So I don't have a copy of it, of course, but the book I want to recommend is Saturn Run by John Safford and Katine. And this is a book that is set in a near future where NASA discovers that there is some object that is coming towards Saturn, and they know that it's not just a external normal body, rock out in the world, because it's actually decelerating, which is something that an object would not naturally do, as it was coming towards this planet. And so they assume it must be an alien source. And so you have NASA, the US, as well as China rushing to make rockets and spaceships to go off and find out what is there. And so I think that it just has a lot of the same elements as The Martian. So first off, it's near future. So I think the technology is very understandable because it's just extrapolating the technology we already have today. And it has a lot of the same humor. It's very character based. And you kind of have that same tension between, again, like NASA and China as they're kind of in this space race trying to get there. And it's such a good thriller. You will just be turning the pages because I was dying to know what was at Saturn. You do not know, and it's so good. So definitely recommend that one. It does have science elements to it, but just like The Martian, it's explained in a really easy, digestible way. And even if you don't, quote unquote, like get all the science, it's a story that you will just be able to follow along. It doesn't hold up the story or prohibit your enjoyment in any way. So that's, I guess, my first pick. And then if I had to do a second, I would probably say the Planetfall series by Emma Newman. Hopefully I'm not stealing someone else's pick for later on, but this is one I love. It's basically a companion series. The first book follows a group of colonists that go off to colonize a different planet, and it's following them afterwards when someone shows up. And I like her books because while they're again set in the future, the technology again isn't too far-fetched. It's very understandable. Like they talk about things like 3D printers, which we already have. And so I was like, okay, I understand what this is. And her books also are very character-focused. They have great neurodiversity and different queer representation. And again, each of them are really standalone. So you could read the first book and be done with it, or you can continue on. My personal favorite, if I can find it, is actually the third book, called Before Mars, which is about a mother who leaves her child behind on Earth and goes off to Mars. And all of her books have these like mystery elements to them, but again, like they're very character focused. And so it's, in this book particularly, you're dealing with a mother and just coming to terms with making a very unpopular choice, because that is not the choice a mother is supposed to make, is choosing her career over her child and husband. And I just thought it was so gutsy and so well done. So either of those I think are really good places to start for sci-fi beginners.
Yeah, I've only read the first one, but I really enjoyed it, and I've been like wanting to continue on in the series, but I haven't gotten around to picking up any more of the books. I also remember there being some really good mental health representation too in her
absolutely
book.
right.
Yeah. I had that one down for a later answer as well, but I'm sure it's good that we're talking about it now. Okay. Did you have another one, or was that it, Rachel?
I had those two. I can keep going if you want, but
we'll move on. Okay, so our next category is talking about favorite science fiction thrillers, and I have to say, science fiction thrillers it's one of my favorite subgenres, in addition to like dystopian and post-apocalyptic sci-fi. So I have an answer that I'm sure a lot of people might mention, and that is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. And this is actually also one that could have worked for sci-fi for beginners, I think, because it's just very digestible and it's so fast-paced. At least I thought so. I could hardly put it down when I was reading it. I basically read it in 2 sittings, which, like, I'm not a book binger, but it's about a man. I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but he has a family. He's a scientist, and he goes to go pick up some stuff to make food with his family, and he gets kidnapped, and then he like wakes up in a world where his like family doesn't exist, and he has to like figure out what's going on and he spends the book trying to get back to his family, trying to find them. And I just think it's a lot of fun, and it's easy to read. It's like a page turner because it's a thriller. I actually got my husband to read it, and he's not a reader, and he enjoyed it as well. I think it would make a really great movie. I don't know why they haven't made a movie or TV show out of it, because I think it would do really well. And then I had a YA pick as well. I have The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I don't know if anybody else has read that, but that's by Lauren James. And I also really enjoyed this one on audiobook, but it's about a girl who her and her parents are going on a long journey to like find another planet. I think if I remember correctly, they have like people on the ship with them that are sleeping, and they're like their caretakers, but her parents die on the way, like at the very beginning of the book. And so she's alone on this ship. And then people from Earth are sending another ship to meet up with her, to like send another person to help her because she's just a teenager. And I think that's all I want to say about it. They start like exchanging emails and stuff between the ship that's coming to meet her. And things just might not be what they seem. And I really enjoyed that one. I had a lot of fun reading it. I could hardly put it down. I was listening to this on audio, and it was one where I was like cleaning the house extra because I didn't want to stop listening, and I wanted to know what was going to happen next. But that one's also a really fun sci-fi thriller, especially if you prefer more of the YA age category.
I actually do not read a lot of this subgenre. I don't know why. I think whenever I do read a thriller, it is very fun, but I don't reach for it. But one I couldn't not think of, and I don't think it's technically a thriller, but it's a page turner, so I'm putting it here, and that's Kindred by Octavia Butler. I read that book in like 2 days. The prologue, the first section is one of those prologues that starts at the end of the story, and all you think about is how in the world did we get here? Like the entire book. And the premise is, it was contemporary at the time it was written. It was written late 70s. So it's a woman from the 70s and 80s who is Black in America, who suddenly is sent back in time to the antebellum South, which is obviously not a great place to be, times of slavery when you're Black. And she keeps getting pulled back in time, and she can't figure out why. And each time she's pulled back, she has to stay longer and longer and figure out how to survive. And like I said, you kind of know where the story's going when you read the prologue, but you really have no clue how it gets there. And it's a really hard read. Like, it has a lot of those topics that are really hard to digest, but because of those thriller aspects, I could not put it down. It was very much like a Black Mirror episode where it's like, this is horrible, why am I watching this? But I also cannot look away sort of situation. I would also say this one's definitely more military sci-fi, but I don't think we're talking about specifically military sci-fi, and it had thriller elements, and that's The Light Brigade by Cameron Hurley. I don't know if any of you guys have read this one, but no one has? Okay. This one's really good. I think actually most of you would really like this one. So this is about basically a military grunge infantry level person, and she is sent to Mars to fight this battle. She doesn't know a lot about it because we really get it from her perspective. She is the military grunt. And whenever she is sent, they are sent as light. So they are broken down into particles to be transported places, because that's how we have solved this problem. And every time she's transported, she is not in the right part of the timeline, and she doesn't know why. So every time she's transported, it's a very nonlinear story. And there's that mystery because you're like, what is happening? We really don't know what we're fighting, why we're fighting. We don't know what this technology is doing to this person. And so in that way, it's also one of those, like, I read it in like a week really quickly sort of books, and it's like 300 pages, and I really like military sci-fi from the angle of the person who's being forced to follow the regime and like unpacking that. So I think those two are my main ones. And then I have a YA one like Jade that I don't think anyone here has read either, but it's Catfishing on Catnet. Have you read that one, Rachel?
Yeah, I have. It's super cute.
It's super cute. And like this one's weird because it's like so cute and thrilling. It's a very weird mix of things, but you have this girl, it's near future, and her mom are always running away from her dad, like, who is like a bad person. So they always are changing schools. So she doesn't have friends. So her only friends are on this like platform online called Catnet. And it involves an AI character, and it involves basically her having to keep running away from her dad. So that's like the thriller aspect, but it's also very found family. I really don't know how to describe this book when I talk about it, but it's not popular enough, and it's really cute, and the sequel's coming out soon, and I'm really excited. So that's why when Jade mentioned a YA thriller, I'm like, wait, I actually have read one of those. So it quickly got added to the list.
I need to pick up The Light Brigades. It sounds so good. It's one I wanted to read for a long time.
It's
Yeah,
really
I
good.
just
And
moved
that,
on
like,
my Twitter.
I finished it and I thought I would never think about it again, but that was 2 years ago. So it like stuck with me like way more than I thought it would, because it was just so like action packed, and now I want to buy it and make my boyfriend read it so I can read it again.
I also love, well, horror is like my second or third favorite genre. So I love sci-fi and horror together. It's one of my favorite things. When it's done well, it's just perfect. So I don't know. This Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I don't know if you would call it thriller or horror or what, but I think it fits that category. It's one of my favorite books. And I just learned recently, like, a lot of people don't like it. I don't know why, but so there's this Area X. I've actually only read the first in the trilogy. But anyways, this Area X has been like separated for a long time, and a lot of researchers have gone in the past to like figure out what's going on here. But something bad happens to all of them. Like when they come back, they're different, or people are dying and such. So there's, I think, 5. I want to read their titles. So an anthropologist, a surveyor, a psychologist, and the leader, and a biologist. The 4 women are sent there, and it's weird. Like, it's weird horror sci-fi where strange ecological things are happening, and it doesn't always make like sense, I guess, in like a real world way, but that's what's fun about it. And I don't know. Have you guys read this book? Any of you guys?
I've only
I
seen
actually have not, which is
I really
shameful.
want to.
Genres.
I'm still on the fence about it because I like horror, but I don't like weird a lot of the time. So like I just don't know if I'll like it. I enjoyed the movie, but I hear they're kind of different anyways. So yeah, I've been really on the fence about reading it. I just feel like I might not like it, but I want to like it.
Yeah, it's definitely weird, but it's so short. I don't really want to say more than that. It's just about like what happens when you put these 4 people isolated in this place together, trying to survive and trying to survey the land and figure out like what's going on here. So that's probably my favorite one. This might be more horror, but I think it'd be like a subcategory for sci-fi. And I guess that would be The Troop by Nick Cutter. I mean, I think that's still a sci-fi book because there's this group of Boy Scouts they're sent to some island, I think, in Canada.
Yeah.
I can't remember, some island. But anyways, and then a man comes up ashore, starving and willing to pretty much eat anything. So there's the sci-fi aspect of what's going on with him. It's a very body horror heavy book, I would say, but very, very enjoyable if you like body horror and sci-fi. I don't know. It's really good.
That's one of my favorite horror books for sure.
I just bought that one. I'm so excited
Oh,
to read
sign hard, Brittany. I'm just loving your pick. I adore that book so much. I always describe it as like gross out horror. So it's like my level of like, I can't eat a sandwich while reading this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's
don't
that
do
gross.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
Yeah, I love it
Jesse,
so
have
much.
you
And
read
that's
it yet, or did you say you just got it?
I just bought it, so I'm like really excited to read it.
enjoy.
I am excited for you to read it.
Yay, gross things.
Yay, gross. So I have to plug this one because it's like one of my favorites is Jurassic Park. Come on now. You know I was gonna mention this.
I knew it was coming.
I love the movie. The book is so great. Just like, do I have to even explain this? It's an amusement park with dinosaurs. Go read it. It's fantastic.
I need to read that.
That's all
You
I
are
have to
like
say
the
about
reason
it.
I want to read that book.
It is so good. And it's like it's different from the movie in like the best ways. Like the movie's still fantastic, but the book it's just great. It's just like fun thriller dinosaur. Like, come on, it's great.
I almost put this in
and
the beginner's one, but I knew you were going to talk about it. So
and then another one I've never seen anyone talk about, and I found this at Goodwill, and I was like, it has a cool cover. It's like one of the ones that's printed on. It's The Oracle Year by Charles Sewell. And I've never seen anyone talk about it, but it is so much fun and so thrilling. It is about a man who wakes up one day and he has these like ideas or like predictions in his head, and he's like, like, why do I have these things in my head? And he's realizing that all of these predictions he has in his head start to come true. Like a couple days later, he'll like predict that there will be a horrible storm in a certain state, and then it comes true. And he's like, all right, I need to start publishing these predictions online. So he creates this website anonymously and starts publishing all of his predictions online, and it goes viral because all of the predictions are coming true. So now the government's after him. So now we have religious leaders after him. We have all these different like parts of society coming after him, trying to find out who he is, and he's running from all these people because he wants to stay anonymous and he doesn't want to be used, for the wrong reasons or whatever. So it's just like so creative. It was so much fun to read. It was very fast paced. So I love this one. And then the only other one I have is if you like dark matter, which I think everyone does in this chat.
I haven't read it yet. I read Recursion.
I've never read any of them.
Okay, I want to. My boyfriend has a copy, so it's on the list. It was on my like 21 to read in 2021, but I read Recursion because it was for like a nomination thing. So I'm out of order.
Gotta go read Dark Matter. It's so good. But if you like dark matter, then I would recommend The Punch Escrow. It's super similar. The Punch Escrow by Tal M. Klein. It's taking a technology that really shouldn't exist and examining the real life repercussions of having that technology in place in society. This particular technology is teleportation that it's playing with. And so you have the ability to teleport from one place to another at these certain stations that are located in, centrally located areas. And there is something with this technology that is being kept secret, and you are trying to figure out why, and it's not so good. So I love this one. I recommend it, and it was really thrilling. So those
I haven't heard of either of those, the Oracle Year or the Punch Escrow. I just add them to my Goodreads.
Really? Is there a movie for the Oracle Year? Because I swear it sounds so much like a movie I've seen one time, but I can't think of the name of it.
No,
or
I
is
don't
that
think
new?
So.
Okay.
If there is, you'll have to tell me, because I don't think so. It's a pretty
Is it newer?
I don't think anyone talk about the book, so I think it's pretty.
It came out in 2018.
Oh yeah, no. Then it's not the same.
Okay.
But it sounds good.
It's a fun one. It's really fun.
Okay, so I'll go. I'm also wanting to do a dark matter read-alike, but a different one. Punch Escrow is on my TBR, thanks to Jesse. But yeah, if you like dark matter, my pick for that is, if you're looking for something similar, is Here, Now, and Then by Mike Chen, which is a story of a time travel agent who gets trapped back in the 1990s. And he's there for so long, he kind of loses his memory. And so he ends up basically meeting a woman, starting a family, all of that. And then years later, the time traveler agency comes for him and says, we're here to bring you home. And so the story is about a man split between two different timelines and two different lives. And so he finds out that in the future where he's from, he does have a fiance and, very promising good life there. But then he's also very strangely attached to his wife and child back in the 90s. And so I think if you like the family aspects of dark matter, specifically the fact that he is trying to get back to his family, if you love those character emotional elements of it, then I would recommend this one. It's less heavy on some of the science fiction technology elements that you get in dark matter, but same thing, page turner, really good character work. And yeah, I really like that one. So that's about my top pick. Otherwise, yeah, things like Jurassic Park and other ones that you already mentioned. Angela, I think you have read another one. You might call it horror, but I would classify The Fold by Peter Clines as a sci-fi thriller. And I think
it was on my
one.
list. It was both The Fold and 14, but it's I wanted to talk about the other three more, so I figured maybe you would bring it up. But yeah, those are good.
Perfect. So that's another one, yeah, I'd recommend that follows a genius man who works as a teacher, but he's pretty much like a Sherlock. He has a photogenic memory, and so he is pulled into the secret government project where they have created these teleportation gates, which are pretty much like the Stargate gates, where they're able to walk through them and then be transported to somewhere else. But there's something not quite right going on. And the whole book is about trying to figure out what that thing is. And the mystery is so good. You want a book that is going to keep you turning the pages, this is that, because I was like, what is it? What's happening? And the author puts in all these amazing clues that like once the like dots come together and you see what's happening, you're like, oh my gosh. And it was so good. And the ending is just nonstop action. Highly recommend that one. I think I actually read it or picked it up because of you, Angela. So
Did
like
you
I
read
said,
14 yet? Because I like 14.
I have.
I
don't know
personally
which I
like 14.
better. I don't know if I can choose between them. And
Well, I
Jesse,
think
if you
I
haven't
read
read that, you should.
I read 14 and then The Fold, and I think the order matters because I think it's an author who, like Blake Crouch, like they have a thing that they do, and once you know the thing that they do, things are like a little less exciting. So I think it's one of those where like it doesn't like one doesn't spoil the other, but you're more prepared maybe.
That's such a good point, because I read Recursion after reading Dark Matter and like still enjoyed it, but wasn't as impressed with it because it was very similar in formula.
Yeah.
I
agree.
So
that's part of why I haven't read Dark Matters. I'm trying to give myself as much space, but also like I've been trying to forget everything people casually say about it. I'm like, you guys have all slightly spoiled this thriller for me. Like, okay, like, not you guys, but the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to read that series. There's 2 more in that series.
No, now y'all have made me super excited to pick this up. I just saw.
You're gonna love it.
It's so much fun. It is like if you need a vacation thriller read, like that type of energy where it's like I need to be only with a book for the next like 48 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair.
Okay, I'm so excited.
I want to read that.
Okay, I better cut myself off there. I could keep going and we'll never get through these categories.
Okay, next category, favorite space opera. I have to admit that I don't read a ton of space operas, at least not ones that I enjoy. It's not, like I said, the subgenres that I enjoy a lot are like the thriller and like the dystopian sort of things. But I've been trying to dabble more in space opera. For this one that I've read recently and really enjoyed, I know that that Brittany also really likes this book. So sorry if you were going to talk about it, but I really enjoyed Children of Time. It's not like super space opera-y, but I would consider it a space opera because it takes place in space. So this one really surprised me because it wasn't about what I thought it was about. So people always talk about this one being about like intelligent spiders. And going into it, I definitely thought it was going to be like scary spiders, but they're not scary spiders. And I actually have arachnophobia, like not super bad, but decently bad. So I was kind of nervous about that. But the spiders, it's okay. So one thing that I think is important to know about the series is that it takes place over like thousands and thousands of years. So it's a very like zoomed out view. And you follow kind of like different characters because of how long the time span is. So you follow like a group of humans, and then you also follow these spiders. Basically, humans have like created a way to speed up evolution. And so they try to speed up the evolution of these like apes. But instead of like working on the apes, it works on spiders. And so we follow the evolution of these spiders, and it's like super interesting. Like if you're into like evolution, biology, anthropology, because as the spiders become more intelligent, they form like a society and like religion. And it really looks into what intelligence in a species that is so different from humans could really look like. And I just found it fascinating. I just thought it was so interesting. So that's like more of the side of the story that I enjoyed, not necessarily like the space opera bits, but it is technically a space opera. And then I also threw on Murderbot on here. It's a novella series. There is one book. The 5th installment is a novel-length book. I read the first 4 novellas. It's not like super deep or anything. It's just kind of like a fun time. And I think it's also like, it's kind of like watching a fun TV series that made me laugh a lot. So this one is a Murderbot is an AI-ish kind of character that is non-binary, and they enjoy, okay, so they've hacked their own governor module, so they have full like control of themselves, but they like pretend that people like humans can still control them because they don't want to get found out. And what they really want to do is just watch a bunch of TV and stuff, but they have to like do these other things, and they keep getting drawn into protecting humans, even though like that's not really what they want to do. So it's a really fun series, and it's very space opera-y. It's one of the more space opera things that I've read, so I wanted to include it on the list.
All right.
I have the most unpopular opinion with Murderbot.
I was about to say, Jesse, just watching you like hide yourself.
Sliding out of
I had to ask. I was like, what is going on? And Jesse's
not a fan.
I'm kind of
and Alan are both not
lukewarm.
fans of Murderbots. And like I said, it's not like a lot of people really love it, and I think it kind of gets overhyped. It's not like amazing. It's just like a fun time, and if you want to basically like watch a sitcom but reading, and the audiobooks are really good. So
Yes.
I have no Murderbot opinions yet. I got them all from the Tor ebook thing, and they're all just sitting on my iPad waiting for me to one day want that like quick humorous read.
yes.
So this actually is the subgenre I really love in sci-fi, because I love that you get to explore cultures and travel places. And I don't really know what the definition of space opera is, so I kind of just go with things that are in space. And
Me too.
you know, like you could, even if you're not leaving a planet you're on, if it's not Earth, then we're good. That's my like definition. And the first one I actually just read this month, and I just got this copy yesterday, and you can't get this cover unless you go on eBay, but this is The Best of All Possible Worlds by Karen Lord. Karen Lord is from Barbados. She's a Caribbean author, and like no one reads her, and everyone should. I've read 2 of her books, and they're phenomenal. This is very like, I don't know if anyone here is like a Becky Chambers stan and is going to talk about them, but this for me, this is like when I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, this is what I wanted it to be, where it's just this like quiet story where you're watching this team of scientists like culturally explore this planet to help. Basically, there's this culture that can no longer live on their former planet. That's like before this book. And this planet where they're refugees, they're trying to find a new home for them. And you're following this team of people travel this world, see all these different cultures. It's very episodic, a lot like Becky Chambers' like first book. That's very episodic. So it's not a big plot book, but I loved it. It has this like slow burn romance, which I feel like you don't always get a lot of good romance in sci-fi, but this one I adored. And this is like a far off future where you have like 4 branches of humanity. Like everyone's still a human, but you have different psychic powers and different abilities associated with different genetic pathways. It's really, really good. And I love Karen Lord's writing. She is like, she gets me and my humor. So like, that's super subjective, right? But like, she has a character in this Grace who like thinks in her inner monologue. And normally inner monologues can be rough, especially if I don't connect with them. But Grace is like this biostatistician like person. And I'm like, I'm a scientist and you're really funny and I get you. And she has to deal with some trauma. And I really love this book. So it takes place on another planet. So I'm calling it a space opera. And I just wanted to talk about it. And I'm going to talk about it now because I love it. And this is The Machineries of Empire. And that's Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee. I don't really know how to describe this book. Rachel's going to have to help me at some point.
Literally bought this because of you, Angela.
And I hope you have a fun time. So this is like the most aggressively world-built sci-fi I have ever consumed. And what I mean by that is you're just going to have to watch and find out is basically what happens in this series. It's military sci-fi. Again, I think a lot of military sci-fi are space operas. I think there's like a huge overlap there. And you're in this place called the Hexarchate. It's this empire thing. It has different factions of government. And you're following this Captain Calcaris who gets put into a rough situation. Basically, she's the employee who works too hard at her job and is getting punished for it. Like she's too good at what she does. And then she has this big task that she has to handle and she has to solve this problem and she's not going to get rewarded for it. And that entwines her with this General Jadao, who is this person who everyone thinks is crazy and mad, but he wins every battle. And you get to follow them solve this problem. And it has the most imaginative sci-fi ever. It's kind of based off math, but it's just so colorful and pretty how they describe how the battles happen and the formations. So like if you want something like you've never seen in space opera, like it's just so imaginative, read it. And I also recently learned that this author has aphantasia, which means they don't like visually see things, which I find shocking because it's so colorful to me and I have aphantasia. So I'm just like, it worked for my brain really well. But yeah, that's what happens in the first book. And the whole series, like it's one of the most satisfying series I have ever completed. It's so good. So that's my second one.
the review you just did, right, for the best of, what's it called?
Best of All Possible Worlds.
So I just saw you write like new favorite or something. I was like, I'm not watching this video yet, but I put it on hold at the library. I'm like, because I know I'm gonna like it.
Yeah, no, that one sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, that sounds
Like,
really,
if
really
you,
good.
because you liked To Be Taught If Fortunate, which I don't
Loved
know
it.
if you'll talk about, but it reminded me of like this crew of people who you just get to see be together and travel. That's very much this, and it's only 300 pages, so I don't think it overstays its welcome. Like, I think when you have those kind of day in the life stories, you can really flirt with being too long. Personally, for me,
Yeah.
so I think it does a good job.
I
Saved
okay.
it for you. You better talk about it because I saved it for you.
But To Be Taught If Fortunate.
No, I'm talking about a different book you really like.
Oh, well, I have like 3 you could probably be talking about. Okay, for Space Opera Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Is that what you were talking about or no?
Well, I mean,
Okay.
that's a good one, but it's another classic sci-fi.
Okay, yeah, I'll be talking about that one. So this, I mean, this is a space opera, right? It's all set in space. It's a very hard book to describe exactly what's happening. So it was originally published as, I think, 5 short stories. The first book was. So there's a lot of time jumps here, but I love Isaac Asimov, and I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a beginner place to start with sci-fi, because it's a very, I don't want to say acquired taste again, but it's very dry. So we're following Harry Seldon, and he's created this like psycho history using mathematics and sociology, basically where he can predict future events. And he's predicting the fall of this empire and trying to make sure that all knowledge is saved by creating this place called the Foundation. And it's very political, I suppose. And it's more about ideas. It's not a character-driven story. There's not like world building really. It's just evaluating like these ideas that he has and how they might work out, how if people become aware of this knowledge that's predicted, if that changes things so now it's unpredictable. So I've only read the first 3 in the original Foundation trilogy, but I'm really wanting to continue. And I would say that's probably my favorite space opera. You've read them, Angela. Has anybody else read them?
I read them, and I always think of them as like, it's very much like each short story or chapter is like a deductive reasoning problem, which isn't like, that sounds dry, but it's like, it really is like you have people who are trying to work through a problem and you're watching their thought process as they work through the scenario. I like the first one in that trilogy the best, though. I think for me, the second book did a thing I didn't like, and it never really came back.
And I definitely recommend listening to the audiobook, because to be honest, I don't know if I would have enjoyed them physically reading them, but the audiobook narrator, at least whoever does it on Audible, is like phenomenal and brings as much life as possible to like what Angela just described it as. So
you're so right, because that's how I finished it. I could read the first one because I thought the first one was actually pretty cool, and then I struggled with the second one, and they're the same length, and I was like, but why? And then I put off the third one for so long until you told me about the audios. And you're right, he actually brings the characters to life that it's like, kudos to you. You put so much acting in. You had nothing to work with. There is nothing described here.
Now I'm super curious though, Angela, what you thought Brittany was going to say.
Well, I think I'm going to say it later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna have to wait.
We'll have to wait. Okay. My favorite space opera is also the only space opera that I've read so far. So this is kind of cheating. I guess, I mean, Leviathan Wakes you can count as a space opera, right? So I guess I've read that one. But
100%. Yeah.
A Memory Called Empire by Arcady Martin. Yeah. I really enjoyed this. And I can see, okay, so I've seen a lot of mixed reviews on this. It is super dense and it's very complex world building and it really throws you in. It's one of those that you're not really going to understand what's going on. the first like 50 pages, and you just kind of have to go with it. You have to trust that you'll eventually have all the pieces come together, and it's just phenomenal world building. And I loved the politics in this book so much. So this follows a character who is an ambassador between like this space station and this like planetary empire. And so she is tasked with going to this empire and is basically replacing someone who mysteriously died. And so she's trying to figure out, was it an accident? Did someone kill him on purpose? So you kind of have these politics going on, trying to navigate this empire's politics to figure that mystery out. But you also have the coolest technology in this book that you get to explore, where you're implanting someone's consciousness into your own head, and you almost have them as like this subconscious voice that it can like help either like control you or like guide you. It's so cool. It was so cool to explore. So I loved the politics, the world building, and the technology in this book. I thought it was fantastic, and I'm super excited for the second book.
The second book's so good. It's so good. It's so good. Honestly, I think it's so like you said, Memory Called Empire is really dense, and I think has like a couple pacing problems, and is a little like very aggressively confusing at times. And then A Desolation Called Peace, though, it leans into so many awesome sci-fi tropes and like still has all of the awesomeness of a memory, but it's like I legit never had a complaint while I was reading it for pacing. It was
excited.
It has so many cool things. Like I know Jade didn't really like it, and I think Jade will actually really like A Desolation.
Yeah, Angela's kind of convinced me to give the second one a shot. I was kind of on the fence about it. It is just a duology, so I feel like I could read it, but I had pretty lukewarm feelings about the first one. I would say that the pieces didn't come together for me until closer to like 75% of the way through. And I did like the way that it ended. And I do really like the technology with like the memory implanting and stuff. Like I thought that was super cool. But I was just so bored.
I DNF'd it twice, but it's one I know that I'm gonna like. So like I'm just waiting, because I do that all the time. Like I DNF books and then they end up being my favorite. So I'm just waiting till I'm like ready, because it's one of my friends, like his favorite books, and like I know you guys love it. So kind of come back.
I think most people really enjoy it. But I think Rachel, you recently read it, right?
Yeah, I'm with you, Jade. I didn't hate it, but it was just okay. I struggled to get through like the pacing, and I found the characters flat, and like I love some of those like really cerebral space opera, like as compared to Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, which I guess I'm not talking about. I forgot to grab it for this one. I'll plug that as a bonus pick, but yeah, so it's not just you, Jade. So I guess I didn't grab it from downstairs, but yeah, space opera I do love is Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, which is sort of a trilogy following a artificial intelligence that was once part of a ship and is now separated. And the first book is this revenge plot, so good, but was not prepared to talk about that one. So the one I did pick out for this, I love space opera, so honestly, I'm saving a few for later categories. But we have Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden. This is the first book in, I believe it's going to be a duology. I just read the second book, which just came out. But this one is set in a future where people have left Earth and are now existing, rather than colonizing planets, they basically colonize these spacefaring beasts. And so there are beast workers that basically carve out different parts of the beast, the bones, the heart, all of that, in order to make a home for their people. And so there's an aspect of almost body horror to this book. It's not overly gruesome, but I read a lot of horror, so my level of what's gruesome and what's not might be a little bit off, so keep that in mind. But really, this is a story about characters. It follows a young woman who's next in line to be the matriarch of their society, and a beast worker who is considered lower class that she is in love with. And so it has great queer representation, polyamorous relationships. And I am not someone who likes romance in my books, especially my sci-fi, but I love this one. So like just highly recommend it. It does some really interesting things with breaking down gender norms and like flipping it so that again it's matriarchal society. So you get to see, you know, how the men are treated as lesser. And I think it's just very reflective of so many topical issues that are happening today. Diverse representation, own voices from a Black author. Like cannot recommend this one enough. I feel like it's so underhyped. So I wanted to highlight this because I have other space opera picks that are probably a little more obvious that I could have gone with and will probably still come up in this video. But yeah, I think that's it for me.
I
That
just
one sounds
read
really
their
good.
book, The Prey of Gods. Nikki Jaden's debut, I think, was The Prey of Gods, and it was so cool. I'm so excited for Escaping Exodus. Her mind is awesome.
Yeah, I think if you like that one, you'll love this one even more. I've started that one, and yeah, I'm the same way with you, Brittany. Honestly, like I will read a book and be like, I'm gonna put this down for now. It's not a DNF I didn't enjoy. I'm saving this for later when I'm in the perfect mood, so that my mood does not spoil, you know, this becoming a new favorite. So I very much understand what you're saying.
I love Ancillary Justice too. I really liked it, and I didn't continue with it yet, but it was one of the most like unique sci-fis I feel like I've read to date.
I completely agree. I just found it like so mind-bending and just, I know, again, and that's one like I would not recommend to beginners. That was actually one literally where I started it when I first was getting into science fiction, and I remember I was loving it, but I couldn't understand it. And so I put it down and said, I'm going to teach myself how to read adult science fiction. I went and I read The Old Man's War, you know, The Martian, all of that, and I read through it. And then once I had kind of worked my way up, I came back to it, and now it's one of my favorite books. So you know, I definitely think, you know, you got to do a few stepping stones, but it was worth, you know, worth the wait.
Yeah, that one's on my TBR. Okay, next category, favorite sci-fi series. And I don't know if I've read a ton of sci-fi series, but the one that I think is like really obvious and that multiple people might be planning to mention is The Expanse. So I've recently finished the 4th book in the series, and it's so good. Each one is just, I wouldn't say each one's a standalone. It's not. They're related, but they definitely like are complete stories on their own, with like little hints at the end of like where the next one's gonna go, and there's like reoccurring characters and stuff. But I just think this one's just like a really fun time. It's not super heavy on the science. There is a lot of politics, so if you like politics, I think that this would be a good pick for you guys. It's really interesting because, okay, so in the series, you have people from Earth and then people from Earth who have colonized Mars. And then you have people who live out on like spaceships and stuff, or stations, I guess, called the Belters. So there's like 3 different human factions that all have different like politics going on with each other. And there's, I don't know if you would call it like racism, but you know, there's like tension between the different groups. And then there's this whole like element of like alien technology that comes into play in the first book. And one thing I enjoyed about the first book is it definitely had kind of like a horror element going on, which I really enjoyed. And I just, every time I pick one of these up, I can hardly put it down and I finish them pretty quickly. Some of the characters are really fun, and it's just, I mean, a lot of people really enjoy the series, and I think there's a good reason for that. It's pretty digestible and fun to read. And then the other series I had picked, I was hesitant to put on this list because I've only read the first one, and that's the Planetfall series by Emma Newman. I really want to continue. I enjoyed the first one so much that I wanted to go ahead and put it on my series list. But we've already talked about it, so I won't go into it too much. But I really enjoyed the first one, and I'm super curious about the rest of the series.
I just want to chime in because we were talking about it before, because these are considered like companion books, but just like we were talking about Peter Klein's book, this is kind of the same idea where you definitely want to read the first book first, Planetfall, and then the second book, which I don't own, is After Atlas, and then it goes on to Before Mars. But arguably you could read Before Mars, which I did, and people will yell at me for it, but I read Before Mars before reading After Atlas, and it's basically kind of the same thing where depending on which book you read first, it will kind of spoil the other book. And so I would actually argue, because I think that this book is better and I think it has a more wow ending, I actually encourage people to read this book second. But again, people who read After Atlas before reading this one like After Atlas more than I did, because like set up the order, but it's a weird book. So I just want to kind of plug that.
And if you go to Emma Newman's website, she has a couple different reading order recommendations. I think the important thing is that you don't read the fourth one first. I think you have to read the fourth one either after the second or third, one of those, but then the first three are kind of like interchangeable in how you start them.
Yeah, which I think is just really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just the person who's just going to go in publication order because I feel safest.
That's me every time.
That's me too.
Well, I already mentioned Machineries of Empire, which is this lovely stack. That's obviously a favorite series. This one, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about it. I'm just going to show the first two, but this is technically called the Hyperion Cantos. I think of them as two separate duologies. So look at these nice mass market 80s, 90s covers. Gorgeous, right? So great. I think of them as two separate duologies because he like retcons stuff for no reason. And I'm like, why'd you do that? They're both great stories. What's also cool about this, and I thought about it for the thriller, but it's actually more like low-key horror, is you have this creature called the Shrike. In this first book, people compare it to the Canterbury Tales, which is like a horrible thing to do because I feel like a lot of people are scared of the Canterbury Tales from like English class. But it is like almost a short story collection where you're following these people on a pilgrimage to these pyramids. It's been like 5 years since I've read it, but they're going there. And it's also like the end of an era in this space empire. So they're doing this thing in parallel to the world universe kind of ending. And they each have this kind of horror short story sci-fi experience with this terrifying Shrike creature. And then in the second one, they finally make it to the pyramid and you get to see the fallout. I love the fall of Hyperion so much. This one was kind of hard for me, but I think now that I'm better at sci-fi, like I read this way early in my sci-fi reading and I'm excited to come back to it now that I've like have a brain. So this like whole 4-book series I really liked, and it definitely has some stories that are just like so heart-wrenching, and like some are really gross and some are definitely like, oh, you are a male man who wrote this book in like the 80s or 90s and are very scared of the female body. I don't know what happened to you. Like he does a couple weird things that are definitely like of the time. So I definitely want to like warn that, but it's what happens when you read classic sci-fi sometimes. Although I don't know what classic means. Like I said, this is like late 80s, early 90s. I was born in 92. I don't know what classic means at all.
It's not as bad as classic fantasy from my experience yet.
Like it's yeah, like I said, there's just like some of the horror attributes. Like if you choose to read it, you're just going to be like, what did a woman do to you? Like what happened? Like it's not bad, but it's just like, that's a visual that stays with me. Like I can't remember specific plot points, but there are some of the horror visuals that I'm just like, where was your brain? But I really like it, and I've wanted it to be a TV show because it could work so well as like a mini series, because it is all these like horror suspenseful short stories. And the Sci-Fi Network was supposed to, but then they never did because you all know how those things fall through, and I was bitter. But that's definitely a series that I don't feel like a lot of people talk about because it is older and kind of a commitment. And I do think the first book, although probably technically the best, is probably like not the most enjoyable. So it's like you have to get through that. And yeah. And I guess also now, because I just want to talk about A Desolation Called Peace, is I love the Texcalan duology. And I'm just saying the first book is rough and it leans more into political intrigue mystery. Like that's its plot. And that like slow-paced kind of convolutedness is not the plot of the second book. The second book is more like first encounter. And it's really cool.
I love her.
And that's the seeds of that were planted in the first book. And then I was like so much more interested in that. And I was like, why are we focusing on this mystery? I want to know what's going on with this thing. So
yeah, no, it's definitely more military sci-fi and first encounter in the second book. So it has like a lot of stuff from like that subgenre of sci-fi, and you're more further away from like political machinations, which are fun, but like can be really dry and sometimes pretty slow.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like I gave like Memory Called Empire like a solid 4. Like I really enjoyed it and I thought it was like a really good like literary thing for me to read, but like A Desolation Called Peace was like fun. And I like gave like 4. So
Everybody tells me like every day I need to read Hyperion, so I'm gonna read it this year. I'm really excited that you
That
guys-
one
Let me know when you're gonna
on
read
my
it, 'cause I
radar,
need to
but you
reread
make
it
sound
so bad.
I will. It'll be sometime soon. Not March, but I'll definitely let you know.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna go be true to my heart, because if I have to say like my favorite series, then I'm not gonna have a unique answer, because like Red Rising by Pierce Brown is just, I don't really have a lot of the right words, because it starts out just enjoyable, entertaining with the original trilogy. I don't know if I need to get into what Red Rising is about. I feel like it's pretty widely known for being a dystopian sci-fi, compared a lot to the Hunger Games. So we have that like competition type of aspect in some of the first 3 books, and the revolt against the highest power, the Golds. But Pierce Brown's writing improves tremendously from even the 3rd book to the 5th book, that he has become like a favorite author of mine. His prose is stunning, but I am such a character-driven reader. I would die for the characters in this book. I am like an emotional wreck when it comes to Iron Gold a little bit, but Dark Age especially. And waiting for the 6th book, like I'm not okay. I just love this world, but I love the relationships and the friendships and even the romantic relationships and the turmoil that everybody goes through. I love it. So I don't even like battle scenes. And I could read Pierce Brown's battle scenes for like, I don't know, every chapter, and I'd be fine with it, because I just think he does such a good job. So this is definitely my favorite sci-fi series. I don't even think there's one. Well, there's one that comes kind of close, but I'm not far enough into it yet to say. So I know that's like the probably popular answer, but it's true.
What's the one that
I was not a huge fan of Red Rising the first time I read it, and I was not going to continue on with the series. But you and Elle and Leanna and like every booktuber who is like, oh my god, Golden Sun is so much better. It's like, you have to keep going. And so I'm like, all right, I need to reread Red Rising and continue on with the series, because I want to get to like Iron Gold and Dark Age and see like what you guys are talking about, because I feel so much FOMO.
So there's a particular trope, and I don't want to say what it is specifically. If you like Breaking Bad, it happens in that show a bit, to be like not super obvious, but this specific thing that happens with a character arc is like one of my favorite things to read about. And so you're just watching the events take place. And I know it's the one thing that kind of turns some people off from it, but my villain loving self, I'm like, oh, what's happening? What is happening?
I'm so
you're speaking Jesse's language.
You're speaking my language, like Breaking Bad, like Good Go Bad, I love all that stuff.
You might have just finally sold me to check out this series, Brittany. I obviously know about it, but I've held off. But it's like, I think I know what trope, if you're suggesting the trope I'm thinking, I am all here for it. So thank you.
Totally convincing the world. But let me tell you, I've had so many people on my channel. They're like, well, I guess I will continue with Red Rising. And not one of them has been like, that was a waste of my time. So maybe that'll
good to know, because I was a little bit like, is it just the Hunger Games again? But no, you got me intrigued. Darn you.
Yeah,
I've also read like all 5 of those, and the one thing I'll say is like for me, the second trilogy era, whatever it's called, like I'll know my opinions on that when we do get that 6th book, because right now I'm a little bit like a lot happens, because it feels like like Brittany was saying, it's 2 different writing styles almost. It's like the first 3 are like very bingeable, consumable, fast, action-packed reads, which like I'm now forgetting what happens in Golden Sun, because I read these before BookTube, so I just read all 3 and I was like, these are great. These are
it was like one book in my mind.
I was like, these are all awesome. And then Iron Gold and Dark Age are much more complex, much longer, so they lose that bingeability a little bit in the length. And I was confused. And I think part of my problem is I took Dark Age with me on vacation, because I read all of these on vacation because they were like easy reads, but Dark Age is not an easy read at all. So questionable morals a lot, and just like character studies almost. Oh, I don't know. It's so dark. And Dark Age leads with that title. It's dark.
That is true.
Oh, y'all have me so excited. All right, I know we're like already at over an hour, so I'm only gonna say one of my choices. I could like talk about these books for so long. All right, My favorite is a YA sci-fi series. It is Chaos Walking by Patrick Ness. There's a movie coming out for it that I'm super excited for. Tom Holland has my whole heart. I love this series so much. It is very firmly categorized as YA. It's definitely like you are following a young teenage boy protagonist, and he acts his age, which I really like, because sometimes you find YA where the characters don't act their age. They act like they're like 25, and you're like, why are we in this 16-year-old's head and he's 25? So definitely acts their age. It is a world where we have a boy who is a part of a society where there's only men. And we know we're on a different planet. And on this planet, there's only men, and every man can hear every other man's thoughts. And it's constant. So they always have this thing called noise in their head. And it's not just like hearing their thoughts, it's actually like seeing images of their thoughts as well. And the way it's written is so clever, because you're in Todd's perspective. And Todd is kind of uneducated and pretty like isolated in this society, and so he has like grammatical errors, and it has this quirky writing style that might take a while to get used to, because you're very purposely reading from a character's perspective that like doesn't use proper grammar, and the sentence structures are kind of off sometimes, and the way the noise is done is very unique, but it's so clever. And it kind of kicks off the story when our main character ends up stumbling upon a girl, and he doesn't know who this girl is, where she came from, and that kind of propels the story forward. But it's about so much more than that. It has such great themes, and it gets really dark for a YA series. Like the first book is like pretty dark, but then the second and third books, I think, get a lot darker and explore a lot about like the original inhabitants of this planet, and how when the humans like colonized this planet, it kind of drove out those. It's really good. It's really good. So I don't want to say too much, but oh my God, go check it out. And
I will second that. One of my favorite, it was my first Patrick Ness, and one of my favorite YA series. It was on my list for post-apocalyptic or dystopian, because it's kind of in that setting. I will plug the audiobooks for that series as well, especially if you struggle with Todd's like language, like the way it's written. It's kind of got this vernacular, and I find a lot of people really don't like reading that. But if you do the audiobook, that's a little easier to digest, and the way that they do the noise in the audiobook is like super cool. But I agree, I really appreciated all the themes that are explored in that series and how dark it gets, and that's a really good trilogy.
It's so good.
It's so good.
So honestly, my favorite sci-fi series definitely is The Expanse, but it's hard to convince people to read this. So the one I want to talk about is one that I recommend for people that don't want to make the commitment, because each of these books are like over 500 pages. There's 8 published, with the 9th on the way. I've read them all. So if people are not willing to do that commitment, if they want to try space opera, what I usually recommend they do is The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt, which is the first book in the Axiom trilogy. And this is just a more self-contained story. They're a lot shorter. Essentially, it's a group of ragtag salvagers that come across this generational ship that I believe is around Saturn, or one of the planets in our solar system. But it's strange because it should have gone out years ago into the vast galaxy, and so it's weird that it's come back. And they find people on this ship who, when they wake them up from stasis, tell them that they've made contact with the first alien species. And basically it has all of the tropes of space opera. So there is, again, like these ragtag team of people that come together as a found family. There is ancient alien technology involved, and it's also incredibly diverse. You have lesbian relationships, bisexual relationships, an amputated character. And so for me, it brings in the diversity of what you often see be in an optimistic future like Becky Chambers, which I know is a booktube darling and favorite. But I'll say that The Wrong Stars I pitch as A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but with plot, because I love Becky Chambers books, but sometimes they're lacking in a little bit of narrative drive. And so I think this is a good balance of a more thrilling plot like The Expanse in a smaller package with, like I said, incredible diversity, an optimistic future. And yeah, I just really love this series. I feel like it's very underhyped. So that's my pick for this category.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised nobody had Becky Chambers as one of their answers. I haven't read the series yet, so yeah.
I've only read the first book, and I think it's a little long. Like, I don't mind aimless plots, but if you get long, then I'm bored now.
I've DNF'd the first book twice, but I do love To Be Taught If Fortunate. That one's really good.
I've read that one, yeah.
I love her novella too, yeah. And I just read her upcoming one this summer, where it's a future where robots have basically decide they no longer want to be slaves to humanity, so they go and disappear into the forest, and then they come back and decide to make I'd say first contact or recontact, and so they introduce themselves to this tea monk that lives out in the forest. It's very Becky Chambers. There's very little plot, but it's super adorable.
That's
so
my
I read
most
that
anticipated.
Yeah,
you're gonna love it if you like her stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I'm done on that category. I can keep going.
I was going to ask you if it had more plot. It sounded more interesting to me, but I guess not.
Yeah,
I like the idea.
No plot.
Yeah, the idea sounds really cool.
Exactly.
Okay. Favorite dystopian or post-apocalyptic? I had a bunch of answers to this. So I'm going to say 3, but I'm not going to talk about them too much. I'll start with the YA series. There's a series called that. I don't remember what the series is called, but the first one is This Mortal Coil by Emily Sue Veda. And this one is very thrillery. And what I think is super cool about this one is the virus. I often really like interesting viruses. And I always describe this one as having a reverse zombie virus, which I think is just super cool. But this one also, it incorporates genetics with programming and coding and stuff, because people in this world are able to hack their own DNA through these panels in their arms. And I've only read the first 2, I haven't finished the trilogy, but it's just a really fun sci-fi YA thriller that has a really cool post-apocalyptic virus going on. So I definitely recommend that. And then I've also really enjoyed the book World War Z, which is a zombie book. And I always talk about how the main character in that one, it doesn't really have a main character, except that you're basically following the world as the main character, which I think is really cool. I've seen the movie as well. The book is definitely different from the movie, and I enjoy both separately. And then another zombie-ish virus book is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. I've actually also read M.R. Carey's newer series. Well, I've read the first one in his newer series, which is also post-apocalyptic, and I enjoy that as well. So just a plug for M.R. Carey in general, but I love zombie books. So if you guys have good zombie book recommendations, leave them down in the comment section.
Yeah, The Girl with All the Gifts is so cool. It was on my short list for the beginner sci-fi books, because it's also one of those page turners, and it's, I don't know, I think it has cool ideas at the end. I just
and I like the whole biology aspect of that virus too.
Yeah, I am not cheating, but maybe kind of cheating. I am picking The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin because it's sci-fantasy, and I don't care. Notoriously, a lot of Black authors like to blur the lines between fantasy and sci-fi, and I love it personally. So this is literally about an apocalypse. The 5th season is the apocalyptic season of this planet, so how could it not be on the apocalypse list? I just love it. You're really, that's the plot. You're following these people on this planet that's going through an apocalypse, and you get to learn about how they've adjusted to a planet that's constantly going in and out. I'm sorry if you're hearing this motorcycle. These are my neighbors. They think they're cool. I swear, they're in their 30s or 40s. They have these dirt bikes. We live in Boston. I don't know. But
are they driving them indoors?
Dirt bike.
Kind of sounds like it.
They're insane. But this is, like I said, you're on this planet that's always in a constant state of flux of going into this apocalyptic state, to the point where it's called a season. And they have these different rules. And in this first book, you're following 3 different perspectives. And just what I'll say is, if you read all 3 books as close to together as you can, because it really feels like one cohesive story. And it's just one of my favorite series, period, genre notwithstanding. It does such amazing things, and things that I know I'll pick up on like a reread. And then another one I'll mention is, again, this is more like literary sci-fi, but I like to give these options for people who do like literary sci-fi. And this is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This was recently translated, so this originally came out in 1994. And don't listen to US publishers who keep comparing it to 1984. Yes, it's very like Big Brother watching, there is a memory police, but it's not about that. It's about how the common person responds to the situation in this book. And the situation is these people are on this island in this dystopian future, and they are forgetting things. And when they forget things, they're gone. Like, one of the first things they forget are birds. And suddenly there are no birds on this island. And you're watching this society, and our main character, who is an author, writing her own book. So there's kind of also a book within the book here that's kind of like a metaphor. Like I said, this is very literary sci-fi. So it's definitely one to pick up when you want to think and kind of parse out the metaphors. It's not going to be that typical dystopian like 1984, like Fahrenheit 451, that's going to like keep you going. And I feel like that's what this is compared to by publishers so that people buy it. But it really is more of like a quiet story, watching these people in this village on this island adjust to when they're forgetting things. And then what does it mean to keep living? And it's very similar to like how we all exist. Like this last year, we've all had to deal with things that have left our life, and how easy it is to adjust to a new state of being. Even though, like, you know, it's definitely something you couldn't think 4 months ago. Like, you can't tell me I couldn't do this thing that I used to do every year for like the first 15 years of my life, sort of thing. So I really love this one. I do think it's going to be a mixed experience, but it's really cool. And I don't know. I like literary sci-fi sometimes. I think the sci-fi can do really cool things with themes. So
yeah, that one is on my TBR. I love books about memories and stuff. And actually, the way you described it reminded me a lot of this post-apocalyptic book that was like kind of a runner-up for me. I'm trying to remember what it's called because I have pregnancy brain and I forget things. So I'm pulling up my Goodreads. Hopefully I can find it quickly. Oh, shoot. My Goodreads is being slow.
Angela, that was one that has been on my radar for a while, but then I saw on your channel you describing it, and I was like, I have to read this now. But it sounds so good. But like you said, I think I have to be like in this specific mood when I'm like ready to like think about it.
And I know you sometimes do sci-fi as audio. I heard the audiobook can both be good and rough because, like I said, there's a book within the book, and I don't think when you physically read it, you physically see that it's now the book. It's a different like writing style. But I've heard on ebooks it's not clear, and I've heard in audio there's no like transition in voice change. So people are like, "Wait, what is happening?"
That's good to know, because like I can't do Starless Sea on audio because like book within a book type of thing.
No, I mean it's definitely really cool. I think other people like other Yoko Ogawa better because they're a pretty prolific Japanese sci-fi author. But
okay, do you want me to go while you're looking, or do you want to wait?
You can go. My Goodreads is being super slow.
I do not love dystopian or post-apocalyptic whatsoever. It's not my jam. But one I do love is I don't know if you can see this, Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler.
I'm going to be reading that soon. I'm excited.
Oh, I haven't read the sequel yet because if I'm understanding correctly, it was supposed to be a trilogy that didn't get finished. I believe. So I've only read the first one, but so it's like set in 2025, I think. And it's like eerily similar to what could be happening in the world nowadays because of the society. They're like in these walled communities. Basically, our main character, Lauren, her father is the pastor in this community, and they have these walls to like keep out, I don't want to say like savages maybe, but people that are addicted to drugs and just dangerous on the outside. So I know it says in the synopsis this one thing, but I don't like to say too much with what happens with her family. And she's kind of forced to leave this area where she was relatively safe and protected and go out into the world. I want to say this is set in California. So it's like in the United States. And she leaves with this group of people. And this is very much an analysis of religion for the most part. That's what I took away from it anyways. So she was raised by a pastor with this very closed-minded one way of thinking and a community of people that didn't really question why things are done a certain way. And without questioning anything, people are never like wondering why certain things are happening, or so basically she realizes at the younger generation that like something is wrong and we might need to be looking at things a different way. So she also has this special like empathy power where she feels other people's pain. So that's like another aspect of this, which I really love, books that deal with that type of situation. Like being an empath, like I feel like the emotional aspect of that. So I really like how that was dealt with in this book, and like her journey of figuring out what religion meant to her and what her God was, because that's very heavily focused upon in this book, just as somebody who was raised very, very strict with a religious upbringing and kind of like finding my own journey throughout my life. So the religion aspect definitely spoke to me the most throughout this book, but it's one of my favorite like post-apocalyptic dystopian sci-fi novels. I love it.
You bringing that up makes me really excited because I recently read like a dystopian fantasy called Each of Us a Desert, and the main character is going on this whole journey of like she was told this one religion her whole life and has to figure out her beliefs. So that sounds extra cool because I've heard all the other stuff about Parable of the Sower, but I hadn't heard that yet.
It's so cool to me too. Like, I don't know, it doesn't matter what book it is. I feel like somebody takes away something different from it. So it's always interesting to see like what other, because for me in my head, I'm like, well, what else did they get from it? Because that's what stood out, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited to read that one. Just real quick, I want to plug the book that Memory Police reminded me of. It's called The Book of M by Pink Shepherd. It's a post-apocalyptic, but it has this similar thing where people are forgetting things or like remembering things differently. And when that happens, like those things happen in the world. So like there's like someone imagines or remembers that there was like a Godzilla and there's like a real Godzilla happening, and it's really cool. It has the whole like memory aspect of it, and it's also kind of like literary and really quiet, not what you really expect from like a post-apocalyptic. And so the way you described the Memory Place really reminded me of the Book of M, and it's one that people don't talk about very much, but it's definitely like a quiet book, and I think it would have a mixed reception. But anyways, go ahead, Jessie.
I was just going to say, I am like Brittany, where this is probably my least favorite subgenre of sci-fi, so I just don't have a whole lot. I have the really stereotypical, the most cliched answers for this. I mean, I could have said this. The Giver. If you haven't read The Giver, go read The Giver. I didn't have to read it in school, so I read it as an adult and still loved it. Go read The Giver. And then Scythe. If you haven't read Scythe, I think it deserves the hype. I love Scythe. Go read Scythe. But I feel like those are so stereotypical. So instead, I'm going to cheat and just plug another Octavia Butler, since we're talking about Octavia Butler. Her Pattern Master series, I've read the first two books, Wild Seed and Mind of My Mind. This is such a cool series. It is not dystopian or post-apocalyptic. So this is super cheating, but I just wanted to talk about it in this video, and I didn't know if I would have a chance. The series, it follows a spirit named Doro, and Doro is this entity that is immortal, and you follow multiple generations of Doro meeting these other people who have abilities, and he decides with his immortal life that he wants to breed a new species of human, a new race of human that is mutants, essentially. Like, I'm like, oh my god, are you Magneto from X-Men? This is just excellent. It's fantastic. So he, like in the first book, he meets another entity who is also immortal like him, and they have this like very fascinating relationship, and he kind of recruits her into this idea of breeding these I guess humans with abilities. And the second book, you follow main character, Mary, who is now generations of breeding have kind of created her. And she's telepathic, and she might finally be the one to finally be more powerful than Doro himself. And it is like a character study on Magneto from X-Men. It is the coolest thing ever. It is so awesome. And there's just the abilities, and Octavia Butler always does a good job. I mean, I've only read these two, but it sounds like with Kindred and Parable of the Sower, it sounds like she always does a good job of weaving in social commentary through these sci-fi stories and these like ideas that she has. It's so good. So that I just wanted to plug this series really quick because it's really cool, and I'm really excited to finish it.
I'm reading it next month. I'm so excited.
I'm
Oh,
excited
can't wait
for
to hear
that
what you
too.
think.
Yeah, so I'm with Jesse and Brittany. Honestly, this is just not my favorite category of. I'm sorry if I'm getting all this.
It's only on the list because I asked for it to be on the list.
Yeah, I had a feeling it was a Jade. Jade put it on the list category, but that's okay. And that's why I think, it's good. You almost get recommendations for people who don't like the genre, so you kind of get some different takes. Although I definitely need to read more Butler is what I'm getting from this. But I'm going to kind of cheat and go with more of a horror dystopian apocalyptic story. It's really glowy here, but this is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. So pretty classic one. I think most people at least know of the movie. Essentially, it's about there you go. There's the nice movie cover. Good old Will Smith. Very different than that movie version.
Oh, so different.
Yeah.
So different. I actually really love the movie, and then I read the book and was not happy with the book.
I know. I'm so sad you didn't love it.
Yeah. The movie made you think it was a different monster. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the movie has kind of like a happy ending or like a hopeful ending, and the ending of the book is not hopeful. And I was
I
like,
like those types of endings. Maybe I should read it.
Oh, yeah, you should read I Am Legend.
Yeah,
I think
you'd like it, honestly. But yeah, basically, near future where everyone on Earth is dead except for supposedly this last guy. He's the last man on Earth, and there are zombie-like vampires ripping at the sides of his house trying to get in. And so, yeah, I remember picking it up and being like, I am not in the mood for this depressing book. But what worked for me, again, as someone who doesn't normally read this genre, is the fact that it's all about this man who is the biggest skeptic. And so literally, there are vampires and they are reacting to crucifixes and garlic and all of these things. They're clearly vampires, but he's such a skeptic that he's trying to find a scientific explanation. So he's doing all these experiments and just trying to find every possible logical explanation. And it just really rang true to me because I could see myself being the same way. Literally there could be a vampire, at my doorstep, and I'd be like, but is it really? So that's why it worked for me, is that I just really connected with the main character.
You're making me want to reread it.
You definitely should. But yeah, that's my pick for the category.
And then there's me who's like, vampires are real, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
okay, last category, and I think this one will be quick. I'm going to request that everyone just pick one as their overall favorite. And I really don't have much to say because my overall favorite is going to be Dark Matter. It's just really fun. It's not super sci-fi, but it definitely is sci-fi, and it's a thriller, so it's a page turner, but it has the whole family aspect, and I really love that and it has really good character work, and it's my favorite. So that's my answer.
I'm not picking a favorite. I don't do that, but this is one I wanted to talk about.
All the books that I've already talked about are my favorites. So
see, everything else I've said, I love them all, but this is Exhalation by Ted Chiang, and Ted Chiang is one of my top sci-fi authors, and he's really hard to fit into these categories because he only writes short stories. And his short stories, what I always say is it's like Asimov, where it is very thought-provoking, it is about the ideas, but he adds in characters that are really cool and you really care about, and they go through very human experiences. Exhalation is my personal favorite because he uses a lot of science ideas that speak to my physics hearts, which I guess, if you guys don't know, I used to be a physics major in undergrad. So the story he's most known for is not in this collection. It's the story behind the movie Arrival. So if you watch that movie, I think it was a 2017. It's the same director who's doing Dune. It's a very good sci-fi movie. But this one more talks about free will, predestination, that type of idea, because there's always this idea in science, we're all going towards a state of entropy. Is that something that can be controlled? And this has a story that if you played Neopets will hurt you, because it's basically like there are digiants, so it's a Neopet, and it's things that are in an AI world that you're raising as your creatures, and it's about what happens to them as the world keeps going on and technology keeps going. Like, what's happened to your Neopet, Jesse?
I'm literally going to buy
not okay
right now. Why?
So like that's
Neopet
like a
is.
novella in here, and then there's also like there's one where like what if you could see what your life would be like if you made a different decision. So there are these prisms that are like quantum mechanics, so you can literally see like if you chose to not take the job, is your life better or worse? But it's more about like, is that like a good thing to know, and does that actually change how you live? There are so many great stories in here. I literally love them all so much. My favorite is actually one where you look at what if you had perfect recall, like kind of that Black Mirror episode where you could perfectly see how an argument went down, and you could really be like, see, I was right, like in the infallibility of memory, and actually how that relates to when we introduced writing into culture, and how having written word was like this huge technology thing that changed people's relationship with cultural memory. I really, really love Ted Chiang's brain, like a lot.
That book so hard. Like I'm going to buy it.
Yeah,
That's been on my TBR forever.
me too. I've heard a million people talk about it, but not like that. And I'm like, I have to read that.
Listen, I'm very good at talking about my favorites, and I try really hard to make sure people know what they're getting into, because obviously not everyone wants to read short stories about this, but I think they're awesome, and he's amazing.
You need to pick that
Angela
up.
knows how to sell books.
If only someone would pay me to sell books, I would do it all the time.
I could sell a few. Okay, if I have to choose a favorite that's not Red Rising, it has to be Dune by Frank Herbert. Is this what you were saving for me, Angela? Yeah, okay. I love Dune so much more than I expected. I literally already can't wait to reread it. I've only read it once. I've only read Dune and Dune Messiah, and then I'm reading Children of Dune in March. But I think because Frank Herbert is sort of like an ideas guy, it's very much the same type of feeling that I get when reading Asimov or reading Malazan or books of that nature. Okay, so we have so much that was inspired by Dune that Dune should be given credit for. Like, we're talking like Game of Thrones with these warring houses, or things with Star Wars, or certain metal bands that have taken their inspiration from Dune. So many different things, but we have the Bene Gesserit, like space witches, these mentat, like computer brain people. We have really unique characters. The way that Frank Herbert, like Paul Atreides, like one of my favorite male characters of all time, because he has this like prescience where he can see events in the future, basically. So he's very methodical in his decision making. He's not emotional. He can see people he loves dying, and just, it is what it is. It's how it's going to be. What else do I love about the Dune? What it has to say about like the environment. It was like one of the first environmental sci-fi fantasy novels where he took like a lot of real life research with erosion's not the word I'm looking for.
It's close.
Okay, because you know what I'm talking about, like sand dunes blowing away, basically, is like what inspired this like desert, dry planet, and sort of our valuable resources with how much water means on the planet of Arrakis, and what people will do just to savor these resources, the different factions of people. And I will stop because I could go for, I'm sorry, so
really
long. I just love it.
I mean, when I saw your review, Brittany, I was like, all right, like I'm sold. Because you know, you always hear like Dune is like very much like more of an ideas book, and it's not very character or plot driven. It's like idea driven, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to learn that. And then hearing you describe it, I'm like, all right, I gotta go.
I think you'll like it because it's very similar to how A Memory Called Empire works, in my opinion, which means maybe, Jade, you might not like it, or you're over here, actually. But also, I think it's so great. Like, I almost put this on my beginners, but I wanted to make sure that the person who loved it the most got to talk about it, because it's like great for fantasy readers. Because it's such like, feels like modern fantasy world building in this sci-fi book. Like, that's when you read it, you're like, this did not come out in 65. This was like written in like 2007. Like that's what it feels like.
I do agree. Like it stands the test of time so much. It's so relevant now and back then. And it has social commentary. And I will say the thing to keep in mind, a lot of people, it was like a Patreon buddy read, and a lot of people that weren't used to reading classic sci-fi were sort of thrown off and confused. And they were kind of looking for those elements that are in a lot of more modern books. So there is like appendices at the back of the book that you can look up certain information, and it's all there. But there's a reason he didn't break up the narrative and put it all in the story he's telling. It's there to be referenced like after, or I guess if you want to turn there throughout the book. But so just know that going in. I know a lot of people don't love it, but it's so good if you give it a chance.
I can't wait. I'm just excited. I'm just excited to like be in on the discussion, because I feel like we couldn't have a sci-fi video without talking about Dune at least once.
And if you make it to Dune Messiah, it's so much better for the people that felt like they were missing the character relatability, because Dune Messiah is much more, it's not as grand of scale. It's a closed, contained story with only a certain amount of characters, no time jumps like there are in Dune. It's just a linear timeline with no time jumps and less people, so that you get to like understand the characters better, I suppose. So there's that to look forward to too.
That's exciting. That's very exciting. All right. Well, we've already talked about like all my favorites. So I don't really have much to add here. Dark Matter, Martian, Jurassic Park, all that. The only other one I'll bring up is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. I do recommend listening to this on audio. I read all of these via audiobook, and I don't know if I would have liked it as much had I read it physically, because I call it the Illuminae for adults, only because it is written in like a very different kind of format, just like Illuminae is, where it's written in like file cases and interviews. And so listening to the audiobook, it almost feels like you're listening to like a podcast. Every character has a different narrator, and they have like kind of these little effects here and there in the audiobook that really bring the story to life. It is not the most like unique plot in the whole world. It is about a girl who, as a kid, falls into a big robotic hand, and as an adult wants to be a scientist and wants to find the rest of these pieces of this robot and put it together and figure out where this robot came from, etc., etc. Then you've got invasion comes. It's great. It's just a lot of fun. Very fast-paced, very thrilling, lots of questions that you just have to know the answer to that keep you guessing, and it's a great series. So that's the only other one I wanted to plug. I don't love the third book though. That was sad. That's the only bummer. But I love the first two.
Yeah, I also talked about a lot of my favorites, like The Expanse and all that. So I'm going to talk about a new to me as of 2021 book, and that is Blindsight by Peter Watts, which is an alien first contact story, but the aliens are so truly alien. So it's not like Star Trek where they're humans with a little bit of like makeup on their nose. And so it's just incredibly unique. It's a sci-fi horror book. It has vampires, which normally isn't actually my favorite element of horror, but they're done in such a unique way with a genetic explanation. And this is one I definitely cannot recommend to beginners. It is so heady. There is so much deep conversation around biology and consciousness. And it's absolutely one that you're going to read and then you're going to want to reread it. And highly recommend it. It's not for everyone, but it was one of the most challenging science fiction books I've read, but also one of the most rewarding. So if you are kind of in a quote unquote advanced science fiction reader that enjoy an aspect of horror in there, definitely need to definitely need to check this one out. All right, and I'm done.
That one sounds really good. I just added it to my TBR.
It's available from the library right now.
All right, guys. I know this was a long one, but thanks for everyone watching who stuck it out. I don't know about you, but I got a ton of recommendations from this video. I'm so excited about all these sci-fi books.
Yeah, I feel like we gave each other a lot of homework.
Yeah, that's kind of homework.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. Definitely. All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up now, and we'll see you guys in the next Worldhoppers video. Bye.
Bye.